The real fans know that the Mad Max franchise is less about Max Rockatansky or Furiosa and more about George Miller's roster of eccentric villains. I mean, sure, we love Miller's super solid heroes who enter the scene with conflicting morals and somehow always walk out doing the right thing, but really, the heroes can almost never trump Miller's character designs for the bad guys. From the way they look, their quirks, and their unfettered taste for violence, every antagonist in this franchise has always been out of the box. From Toe Cutter, Lord Humongous, and Anti-Entity in the OG Mad Max trilogy, to Immortan Joe, Dr. Dementus, and so many more. Even if the most recent film released in the franchise was back in 2024, Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, had introduced many new villains. Even though it was Dr. Dementus who hogged most of the screen time, there was another important new character we see in the films for the first time, which left most of us scratching our heads. Now, Furiosa was a prequel to 2015's Mad Max Fury Road, meaning that if we see Immortan Joe's newly introduced son, Scabrous Scrotus, in the 2024 film, he should have also been present in the main reboot. What might seem like 1,000 loose threads in the film are really just one big, intricately connected yarn ball simply waiting to be untangled. So, without giving much away right at the beginning, let's take a look at the entire lore of Scabrous Scrotus in the Mad Max franchise. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Scabrous Scrotus actually made his first appearance in a video game. People who never really followed the Mad Max franchise outside of the movies clearly had a lot of expectations that the 2024 prequel would make an effort to address the elephant in the room related to Immortan Joe's newly introduced son, but oh well. As you know, George Miller is the king of sneaking in Easter eggs, and that's exactly what he did with Scabrous Scrotus' character in Furiosa, because this character actually first appeared in the Mad Max video game. So if you were familiar with the game's lore beforehand, figuring out the fact that the game's story was based on some of George Miller's notes from the Mad Max reboot film should have been a piece of cake. Moreover, one of the biggest discussions around Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, is that George Miller and his co-writers had so much material for Mad Max Fury Road, ranging from backstories to character biographies, that they actually wrote the entire history and lore of Furiosa before Fury Road was even filmed. While that is amazing, what's even more impressive is the fact that it is indeed true, especially with the existence of the video game being rather clear evidence to back it up. Now, the Mad Max video game was actually developed by Avalanche Studios in 2015 and is set directly before the events of Fury Road. In the game, we see Max Rockatansky having a rough run-in with Scrotus and his war boys after they end up stealing Max's iconic interceptor. Scrotus and his war boys then strip Max of every one of his belongings, after which the villain hits Max on the head with his own shotgun and leaves him to die in the desert. However, Max manages to wake up and jumps onto Scrotus' war rig before it drives away. Even though they both proceed to fight one another, Max gains the upper hand when he disarms Scrotus of his chainsaw. Scrotus then tackles Max, but in the chaos, the chainsaw gets stuck in his head, thus splitting it open. Amazingly enough, Scrotus was somehow able to survive this bloody altercation and even tossed Max off the war rig. Afterwards, Scrotus collapsed from the pain and the blood loss. But following this nearly fatal injury to his brain, Scrotus went on to become even more bloodthirsty and violent. Anyways, while playing the game, you get to take control of Max's fate as he builds himself a new car to travel across the wasteland in order to get his revenge on Scrotus. Along the way, Max also learns about Immortan Joe's reign of terror over the wasteland, even though Joe himself is more of a distant threat within the game. Having said that, you should also know that before the Furiosa prequel was released, the Mad Max video game was seen as a mere reimagined spin-off that was loosely connected connected to the movies, especially because George Miller was only a consultant for the game during its development phase, and even its backstory was fully based on his notes for Fury Road. Even so, since Miller did not direct the game, it was not seen as an official part of the series canon. But that clearly changed ever since the release of Furiosa, as the game is now the key piece in the franchise's timeline that connects the prequel film and Fury Road, especially when it comes to the character of Scabrous Scrotus. Coming to the gaming lore, Scabrous Scrotus is described as the very shape and form of evil on Earth. Here, he is seen as a psychotic overlord of the wasteland, whose lust for blood can only be rivaled by his hunger for revenge. As the son of Immortan Joe, Scrotus is feared for his ruthlessness as the protector of Gastown. Apparently, from a very young age, Scrotus has always been an unmatched warrior, as his speed, strength, and fearlessness made him a perfect killing machine. He killed his first opponent in training when he was just 7 years old. And as he grew, Scrotus continued his conquests by defeating enemies, sparring partners, and even his instructors. In his early teens, Scrotus often sharpened his skills by going on death runs between Gastown and the Bullet Farm. Ironically, even if he was one of Joe's Half-Life sons, Scrotus thrived in the wasteland as he absolutely loved the constant war and pretty much had an adrenaline rush at the thought of crushing anyone who tried to build a life for themselves by using his manpower to take their resources and declare them for his own. Scrotus mostly avoided the superficial world of the Citadel Court, and instead he focused on building his own war boy army into the most powerful force in the wasteland. Within the game, Scrotus was known for his brutal methods of torture and cruel nature of killing. He had a taste for morbid theatrics, like wearing severed human heads on his belt and flexing a razor-sharp phallic codpiece. To top off that grandeur, Scrotus's army of war boys were fiercely loyal to him and would literally follow his every fanatical whim, no matter how extreme it would be. Around the Gastown we see in the gaming lore, Scrotus's reign of terror was evident as he marked his territory with scarecrows made out of dead humans. He also had numerous encampments that supported Gastown and kept his army constantly supplied with new warriors. After Max lodged his chainsaw into Scrotus's skull, Scrotus swore to kill him for the humiliation and went to extreme measures to seek revenge when his first attempt failed, by sending his sadistic right-hand man, Stank Gum, and a majority of his warboys on a relentless manhunt against Max throughout the wasteland. Some of the warboys seemed to recognize Max, believing he was the one who had taken down their ruler the first time. Meanwhile, alongside this quest, Stank Gum also led his legion on a brutal campaign, raiding Chumbucket's tabernacle, Pink Eye's stronghold, and later setting his sights on Gutgash's fortress. Pink Eye's people were slaughtered in the attack, and Gutgash's was nearly next, until Max stepped in and stopped it. As the game unfolds, it's later revealed that before his supposed death, Scrotus left behind terrifying scarecrows made from corpses to strike fear into anyone daring to enter his territory, while the bodies of his earlier victims were left to rot as grim warnings of what happens when he claims new ground. It was not until Max entered and won the Gastown race when Scrotus finally revealed he was still alive, and immediately recognized Max. Instead of granting him the victory and prize he had rightfully earned, Scrotus turned the whole thing into a trap in order to seek his revenge for the wound Max had left in his skull. He soon unleashed his warboys on him and nearly finished the job, only for Max to survive after Stankgum's arrow forced him into the pit, where Hope ultimately saved his life. Later, Scrotus tracked down Chumbucket, who had abandoned Max in fear, and tortured him until he broke down and screamed out all the information he had about Max. In the process, Scrotus also discovered Hope and Glory. Out of pure spite, he murdered Hope and beat Glory to death before launching a raid on Deep Briar's stronghold and slaughtering its followers. Now that everything he cared about was ripped away, Max was left consumed by his uncontrollable rage, driven only by the need for vengeance. In the final showdown, Scrotus sent his warboys to battle Max in a chaotic road fight. The clash ended with Scrotus's massive war machine, the Land Mover, teetering on the edge of a cliff. In a desperate move, Max sacrificed both Chum Bucket and the magnum opus to ignite the vehicle in a fiery explosion after being convinced that it would finally bring Scrotus down. But Scrotus wasn't finished yet, as he emerged driving Max's stolen V8 Interceptor and turned Max's own car against him. The fight raged on until Max drove a deadly blow straight through Scrotus's stomach, sending the car crashing. As Max prepared to end it once and for all, Scrotus tried to strike back with the same chainsaw blade that Max had once embedded in his skull. Max overpowered him, ripping the weapon free in brutal fashion, finally killing the tyrant of Gastown for good. But given it's a game with multiple outcomes, the confirmation of Scabrous Scrotus' death is still defined as ambiguous, thus keeping the trail of questions going in classic Mad Max fashion. How is Scabrous Scrotus portrayed in Furiosa, a Mad Max saga? Honestly, this film was ridden with iconic and eccentric villains pretty much vying for our attention. But Furiosa's plot tells us that Immortan Joe actually had 3 sons: Rictus Erectus, Scabrous Scrotus, and Corpus Colossus. Out of them, it seemed like Scrotus was the only one remotely sound of both mind and body. In fact, he was the closest to an ideal son for Immortan Joe, as he had the physical prowess, fighting skills, strong will, and intelligence that the Immortan wanted in his ideal successor. Scrotus wore a tunic made from fish skin because apparently he suffered from a skin disease, and the fish skin soothed his body and prevented him from constantly itching his skin. Moreover, this fish skin tunic seemed to be an extremely rare and luxurious item by the standards of the wasteland, where even water is extremely difficult to come by, let alone finding animals still living in it. I think the funny look was how Scrotus's veins were always permanently popping out of his head. Scrotus already had a hyperactive amygdala, as he was constantly in an aggressive and impulsive state. He was basically a cruel, demanding, greedy, selfish, and arrogant monster whose wickedness arguably surpassed that of his own father's. Scrotus took immense pleasure in claiming power over his land and subjected anyone who was not on his side to a world of fear and threats. However, his intellect was often undermined by his bloodthirsty and warlike nature, and it only got worse later on as Scrotus's brain was further damaged when Max lodged the bladed weapon in his skull in the gaming lore. With that, Scrotus lost whatever little patience he had left and soon began to disassociate from the reality around him. Eventually, his existing rage and warmongering became so overwhelming that he no longer could serve as a stable leader, meaning that once again, Immortan's need for an ideal successor became a gaping hole in his reign of terror. Now, coming to the lore of Furiosa, when Dementus, the leader of the biker horde, threatened to blow up the oil refinery of Gastown by holding Immortan Joe's brother captive, Papa Joe was forced to come to a negotiation with him, because destroying the only oil refinery would rob Joe's empire of the gasoline he uses to fuel all his war vehicles. During this negotiation at the Citadel, Scrotus was present with his father, Immortan Joe, his brother Rictus, and other leaders of the cult of the V8. That's also the first time we see him in a Mad Max movie, where he's portrayed as the bratty, hot-headed son of a tyrant ruling a desolate world. Anyways, Scrotus was absolutely furious when Joe agreed to a more modest, yet still generous, deal with Dementus that allowed the leader of the biker gang to become the new Lord Protector of Gastown. Despite his overbearing nature and rage, Scrotus did not challenge his father's decisions. Now, on a side note, all 3 of Immortan Joe's sons were not exactly perfect, which is why he kept pushing his luck for a perfectly healthy, full-life male heir. But even if Scrotus was not exactly perfect, and maybe you could even call him psychotic, still, he seemed to be in a better position than his brothers, who were either insane or wheelchair-ridden. Anyway, in exchange for the deal with Dementus, Joe got to keep Furiosa as a captive with the hope that one day she would grow up to be one of his sex slaves and bear him a perfectly healthy heir. But while she was inside the biodome, living with the other wives of Joe at the time, Immortan Joe's other son, Rictus Erectus, had taken a strange liking to Furiosa. So Rictus was basically a child stuck in a beast's body, and despite his immense physical strength, he had many disabilities, with his social behavior resembling that of a prepubescent boy. What was even creepier was the fact that this guy had a weird obsession with dolls, and given that he had an underdeveloped brain, Rictus literally considered Furiosa to be a living doll. He was quickly fascinated with her to a point that he kidnapped her and tried to touch her without her consent. This naturally made the young girl super uncomfortable, causing her to run away from the biodome for her safety. After Furiosa escaped from being kidnapped by Rictus, Scrotus noticed his brother's panicked state, and although Rictus lied to avoid getting in trouble, the latter was not fooled. However, Scrotus did not bother to investigate it any further, which of course helped Furiosa escape rather easily. Eventually, as the movie progressed, and Dementus's poor management skills as the ruler of Gastown began causing problems for Immortan Joe's empire, Scrotus immediately demanded that they go to war against him. Basically, this man never gave up a chance to fight. However, Immortan Joe decided to wait and bide his time. Later, when Furiosa returned after a near-death encounter with Dementus, she explained to Joe's war council that Dementus was faking a disaster at Gastown to lure the Citadel's forces away and leave it undefended. While Scrotus was among those who dismissed her claims and went on to insist for a direct battle with Dementus, Joe decided to believe Furiosa and completely readjusted his strategy. Instead of charging towards Gastown, they faked an entire attack to fool the biker horde, while positioning themselves to fight Dementus from their place of strength. During the 40-day wasteland war that followed after this, Scrotus served as one of Immortan Joe's frontline commanders, rallying all the war boys against Dementus's biker army. But despite his utter impatience and lack of tactical finesse, he proved to be quite the capable warrior and leader in open combat. Eventually, the horde was nearly wiped out, and Dementus fled, never to be seen again. Though in reality, Furiosa captured and imprisoned him as a living fertilizer in the heart of Immortan Joe's land. Where is Scabrous Scrotus during the Mad Max reboot of 2015? Although Furiosa does a great job of covering the events leading up to Fury Road, it doesn't fully explain everything within the Mad Max timeline, because if Scabrous Scrotus' character is any example, it seems like there's a lot that has happened between the two movies that we don't know of. However, now that the game is being considered as canon, most of those gaps have been filled in rather effortlessly because the events of the games happen after the events of Furiosa and before the happenings in Fury Road. With Max killing Scrotus between the movies, it explains why Scrotus is not around for Fury Road and why we see People Eater running Gastown. I don't think Immortan Joe would favor his general over his relatively capable son, and probably in that context, it makes sense that with Scrotus getting killed by Max in the tie-in gaming lore, he has no other choice but to declare People Eater as the mayor of Gastown. And as for Max, at the end of the game, he gets back his interceptor and drives off into the distance, trying to find a way to deal with his troubling visions, which is again a perfect setup for the opening scene of Mad Max Fury Road. So in that sense, the game not only wraps up storylines left open in Furiosa, but also gives more context for Fury Road. Even then, it's much more possible that the obvious hollowness around Scrotus' storyline could be answered in another upcoming Mad Max prequel movie that's supposed to completely focus on Max 1 year before the events of Mad Max Fury Road, thus finally resolving this major mystery once and for all. With all honesty, even if George Miller gives us 10 more Mad Max films with such crazy-ass villains, I wouldn't dare to complain. It pains me to see the man getting older, but I'm still holding on to faith that Miller will give us at least one more ride of Max Rockatansky fighting an entire horde of absolutely batshit crazy villains before giving up his reign on the franchise to someone else. Maybe we'll see more of Scabrous Scrotus in the next rumored Mad Max installment. What do you guys think? Let us know about your theories, thoughts, and opinions in the comment box below. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.